Boom, welcome back to the podcast. Philosophy for the people. Dr. Jim Madden is here once again, and we're going to continue our series on Leibniz's On the Ultimate Origination of Things. Jim's cracking a beverage. I love that sound. What do you got there, doctor?
Got a bubbly.
Nice.
I've kind of got like a 12-pack a day fizzy beverage problem.
Yeah, I'm getting over the San Pellegrino addiction myself right now, so just back to basic water. So, hot series, man. Really having a lot of fun with this. Again, let me say, if the gentle listener has not heard part 1 and part 2, you kind of got to take this one in order. Yeah. We're going through the text paragraph by paragraph. So if you just hop in right now, you're probably just going to be horrendously confused, and our jokes are already unfunny enough. If you take them out of their context, then there's no chance that we can succeed.
We're being unapologetically responsible teachers this time. Yes, we're actually taking the text in order and trying to stick to it.
Right.
Just our speculations about the Viking helmet guy,
which will come at the end. I mean, every series ends with how does this relate to the Viking helmet guy, right?
Leibniz on Brandon and the Viking helmet guy at the end of it. Right?
Of course we will. Of course we'll do that, because this is philosophy for the people, right?
For the people. Yeah.
All right. Before we dive back into the text, good doctor, what should we review by way of summary? Any further thoughts that have developed since our last one? Because I love this. It got even after the first session, I just had a lot of thoughts afterwards. I'm like, oh man, I gotta mention that next time with Jim. And you kick us off this time. Mm-hmm.
So, I think the main thing that we have to come away with here from last time, where we ended up, was the can't versus won't distinction, and how important that is going to be for securing what Leibniz wants out of this argument. Right, because remember whatever comes of these kinds of arguments down the road, like what Leibniz is trying to do is secure the dependence of the world on a perfect being that maintains the independence of the world to some degree from the perfect being. Okay, and it is his attempt to not be Spinoza. Right. Okay. Yeah. He's trying not to be Hobbes, where you have just basically a materialist reality that runs on its own, and it's unclear what God has to do with any of this. And he's also trying not to be Spinoza, right? Which is to say, the whole thing just gets folded back into divinity.
Yeah, he is trying to just be a traditional theist.
Trying to be a traditional theist, in a rationalist context. And it's important to note is because for the rational, in other early papers of Leibniz's, on primary truths, which eventually I think we're going to hit that in our Leibniz Masters series, right?
We're going to have to.
So basically, like Leibniz sees the world in terms of a priori demonstrable, entailments. Okay, and it's very hard then. If that's how the world is, it's built on a priori demonstrable entailments. Like, how do you get any real distinction between anything, right, or among any of the things, right? Because they're all mutually entailing situations now. And so that is his project, is to find a way to avoid that. Okay. And what has he done so far? What we've seen is he said, and this is where I got all tingly last time, right? Where he said, look,
a very special kind of seeming.
It was a very special kind of seeming. Yeah. Is where he brings this out. He says, well, look, the only thing, I need to satisfy the PSR for every single state of affairs in the world. Okay. And the only thing that would be a PSR satisfier, if I may, right?
No, I love that.
It would be a PSR satisfier that isn't a matter of logical entailment, is the action of a morally perfect being. Okay.
Right.
So it is inevitable that the morally perfect being would do what is best available to that being in that moment.
Yeah.
But it's not a matter of metaphysical necessity. It's not a matter of logic. It's a matter of moral necessity for Leibniz.
That's right. Now I want to highlight this because this is a really important point. It's also a nice point of, I guess, contrast with other traditional theists, right? I mean, for Leibniz, the PSR is known a priori, right?
Yeah.
So for him, it's got to be satisfied, man. So he uses the PSR to drive right to God as a morally perfect being, right?
Yes.
And then is using that PSR to help give an explanation of every nook and cranny of the world, right?
Yeah.
Now, that's different than traditional theists who will try to demonstrate God's moral perfection by way of other theses, let's say, God as pure actuality and convertibility between goodness and being, right? That would be a more Thomistic line. And of course, it is a great debate of whether, St. Thomas himself would have been committed to the PSR or something close to it. And like Thomas seem like 50-50 on this, right? Some Thomas are like, yeah, definitely, right? And other Thomas are like, no, definitely not with the PSR. But either way, Leibniz definitely is committed to the PSR in a very strong form. And that is not just getting to God's existence, but a morally perfect nature for God as well. And then that's being used to help give the full intelligibility in terms of explanation that we need to satisfy Leibniz's version of the PSR for why we have this world, not just in its existence, but in its configuration in every way, right?
Yeah. And the way this is exactly what you just said, but the way I've been thinking about it, like just on my morning walk today, right, is but besides taking pictures of the sun, but was look for basically for Leibniz, like the argument runs something like this, right? If the world is determinate, right? Okay, then God is morally perfect, right? Then there is a morally perfect creator, right? The world is determinate, therefore the God is a morally perfect creator, right? So if there are determinate states of affairs, if there are facts, right? Leibniz thinks, well, the PR says, then there must be an explanation for those. And ultimately, the only explanation for those that satisfies the PSR and allows for those facts to be actual contingent states of affairs. That's the key thing, that they're distinct from the necessary being. They're actually contingent states of affairs. If there are determinate contingent facts, then God must be morally perfect. There clearly are determinate contingent facts, ergo, God is a morally perfect being.
Yeah. Right? And also importantly, just to summarize another aspect of the previous conversation, Leibniz does think that this distinction is enough to prevent a sort of modal fatalism, right? To really, even though God could have created differently, like it's open to the divine power, he would not have, right? And Leibniz is saying that's compatible with divine freedom, and that's all we need to preserve the contingency of the world. So that way, the sort of necessity doesn't. That's the modal collapse worry, right? That the necessity will just spill or shoot all the way through, right?
And I think this is, and I'm not trying to tangle with people who this is their actual publishing research area, but I think this is the great underappreciated aspect of Leibnizian philosophy in the contemporary discussion, right? Is this notion of a moral necessity as driving a kind of cosmological argument, not just, it's one of my stalking horses, right? Not just metaphysical necessity.
Yeah. And I think it's worth highlighting that because, again, like different Leibnizians have kind of taken, I guess, different paths. I mean, we've mentioned O'Connor a lot, right? And his book, what's the title of it? Theism and Ultimate Explanation or something like that.
Curiously titled.
Yeah. And he seems to like stay pretty close to Leibniz on this, right? But other Leibnizians, they sort of want to just kind of weaken the PSR. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just want to say, okay, we don't need to commit to as strong of a PSR as Leibniz is. Maybe we even shouldn't. Yeah. We'll just commit to a restricted form of the PSR. And that's going to be enough. Because for people who are unfamiliar, the idea with we should probably situate this, and then we can talk about maybe what motivates Leibniz here, is that for people who think that the PSR is necessary, what they're generally going to say is if the PSR isn't true, we're just stuck with a radical skepticism, right? That the world is fundamentally irrational. So like if reason has any grip on reality at all, some form of the PSR is true, right? But it has to be a strong enough form of the PSR. So that's kind of like the game that's being played in the research now is like how strong, how weak. And if you look to people like, I guess, Proust and Kuhn's, their primary argument is going to be like, you can't make it any weaker than it can't be any weaker than a PSR that would entail theism, right? That's essentially how they say like any PSR that doesn't give you theism is not a strong enough PSR. You have these like reason is just gone at that point, right? Maybe it isn't as strong as Leibniz thought, and we don't have to explain every nook and cranny in the way Leibniz did. But the kind of contemporary project, I'm glad you mentioned this, Jim, because maybe it's just helpful just kind of like map it out for people who want to wade through that forest, right? There's some people who have stuck very close to Leibniz on this, and there's others who have they followed in the footsteps of Leibniz, but they've kind of weakened the PSR because I guess they feel maybe Leibniz's moral categories don't do the work that Leibniz thinks it does.
Right. And I mean, so I don't even know if you need as strong a version of the PSR to run this argument from determinate contingency to the moral perfection of the creator. And I should say the free agency and moral perfection of the creator. That's the big money here, the free agency and moral perfection of the creator. Because I don't know that you need because the strong version is you have to have a cause, you have to have an explanation for every positive and every negative fact. Okay. Well, even if you leave the negative fact thing out, I think,
and not just say existence of things, but actions as well, right?
Actions as well,
like the PSR is going to cover everything.
Everything,
right?
Yeah. And I think even if you go like a weaker version of it, there's still, and this I think is what the question is for Leibniz is, how are you going to secure the contingency of these determinate states of affairs, right? Such that you satisfy any version of the PSR, right? Without bringing in these moral considerations about the cause, right? These moral and agenic considerations about the cause, right? I think even with a very limited, truncated version of the PSR, that just enough to get you the first point that Leibniz is making, there is something necessary that exists, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's say you get that. Now, but we want to preserve the contingency of these determinate states of affairs that is the world, that are the world. How else are you going to secure that without bringing in this notion of moral perfection?
Right.
It's unbeknownst to me. And that's why this argument still convinces me in many ways. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Look, I'm very sympathetic, right? But I'm trying to play neutral podcaster, right?
Oh yeah, of course. Right.
We all got to pretend sometimes.
That's right. That's right.
So right. No, that makes sense to me. So the idea here, again, for people who are maybe new to the debate, right, is that we need a necessary reality to explain why there are any contingent realities, right? But now there's the mystery of how you can have a necessary reality that somehow leads to contingent realities and still leaves them contingent, right?
Right.
And I said last time, I think, and there's many like complicated objections that present this. I mean, Rowe, Van Inwagen, Oppie, they all kind of give the same issue. Now, but I think the right answer that short circuits all of this is you need that necessary reality to be a free personal agent, right? That has freedom of the will, and can be a source of sort of indeterministic action, right? But then I would also argue that you want that action to be basic and immediate, right? Because you're going to need that to avoid sort of James Ross's bootstrapping objection of the causal link objection. I'm sure you're familiar with that, right? I don't know how else to do it, honestly. I don't know how else to do it. And you're right. Now, whether there's a best of all possible affairs, that's kind of where Thomas and Leibnizians butt head. But I think you're right on the general point that it seems like we need this category of agency. And to me, it seems to mean moral agency as well, to both to give us what we need, right? Which is necessary foundation, contingent effect, and the necessity and contingency. The necessity doesn't affect the contingency, right? Yeah.
So for my money, the only difference between Thomas and Leibnizians on this is that the Leibnizian is saying, in order to satisfy the PSR, it has to be such that God pursued what was best, right? And for the Thomist, it's to say all you have to do to satisfy the PSR is to say that God pursued something very good.
Something good. Right. Now, I was talking with a Thomas about this recently after the first time we brought up. Let me just mention this and we'll get to the text. Sorry, gentle listeners, but this is relevant. This is relevant. And my impression was that he thinks that the Thomist, and I'm not going to put his name out there because he's not here to correct my mistakes as I misrepresent him. Probably. I was talking to one of my stuffed animals. Let's say my stuffed animal.
As
Peter
you go
said,
on to call him a Philistine or something.
Yeah, my stuffed animal Peter said when he understands this idea of a Thomist saying that it's good, we're thinking of well-orderedness, right?
Yeah.
And my stuffed animal Peter said that, well, from God's perspective, this is the most well-ordered world, right? It is perfect, right? The only reason it could be better is because we sinned, right? And now we're into the deep question of libertarian agency, right? And whether that affects. So it may be
Matthews Grant, call your office.
Right. So phoning Dr. Grant. So in that sense, maybe they're saying the same things. And now the deeper question is, how much do they think the role of human agency or libertarian agency plays in? So I'm just trying to play peacemaker here, Jim. Trying to bring the people together, right? Because that seems like maybe some good middle ground, right?
And we'll get into this as the text unfolds a little more here, but whether or not Leibniz's notion of the best of all possible worlds is at all what Aquinas has in mind when he says there's no best possible creation scenario is an interesting question, I think.
Right. And I think this is where my stuffed animal Peter was saying that there's just talking past each other, right? Because it's not like add one more pineapple pizza, better world. No, when Aquinas thinks of good or best, he's thinking of, is it well ordered, right? And in that sense, well, from God's perspective, it is the best, right? But asterisk, there's libertarian agency in relation to that universal causality and ordering, right? So it could be better. It could be better, but it's because of our fault, right? So anyway, should we go to the text now?
Let's do it.
Yeah, well, I don't want to get too sidetracked. This is good stuff, though. I'm glad we're touching on this. All right. I have it marked this time, gentle listeners. So shouldn't be any shenanigans like last time where I'm fumbling around making a fool of myself. We are at the paragraph "and indeed." Is that right, Jim?
Yes.
All right. Here we go. Leibniz writes, "And indeed, we observe that everything in the world takes place in accordance with laws that are eternally true, laws that are not merely geometrical, but also metaphysical. That is not only in accordance with material necessities, but also in accordance with formal reasons." Important distinction. Logical laws are not physical laws. This is true not only in very general terms, in the explanation we have just now given for why the world exists rather than not, and why it exists this way rather than some other way. Hey, look, there's the PSR, which is certainly to be sought in the striving of possibles for existence. But in descending to particulars, we also see the wonderful way in which metaphysical laws of cause, power, and action have their place in the whole of nature. And we see that these metaphysical laws prevail over the purely geometrical laws of matter. As I have found to my great astonishment in explaining the laws of motion, this is true to such an extent that I was finally forced to abandon the law of geometrical composition of Conatus, which I once defended in my youth when I was more materialistic, as I have explained at greater length elsewhere. So to be a materialist is to be a teenager? Is that what I'm getting?
Yeah.
What I'm getting from that?
So what Leibniz has in mind here, in my understanding, is remember, one of the big fish that Leibniz is looking for is he wants to get the band of Western civilization back together, right? And one of the big splits is religion and science, right? Scholasticism and the new science,
right?
He really, and how much scholasticism he had, he clearly read his Suarez, like that's going on. It seems like he kind of proof texted Aquinas occasionally, right? How much of he actually read is in question, right? But he knew his Iberian Jesuits pretty well. Okay. Anyway, and so what Leibniz is up to here, he wants to say, look, so it's metaphysical reasoning that gets us to God's existence, right? Not geometrical reasoning, not what goes on within geometry books, but what goes on, in terms of why there are geometry books at all. Okay. And he wants to argue here that, but still, because he doesn't want to be a mere deist, he wants to say theism without interfering with science makes a difference, though, in the real world. Okay. And what he's looking at here is, I think he's actually hearkening back to some of the stuff he did in physics, and he worked with optics, and I think he's talking also about, I think it's Snell's law. So please correct me if I'm wrong on that, which is this principle in optics that says, light will always travel at the most efficient possible path when being refracted. Okay. And you can predict it based on, like, it's always going to take it will do nothing in vain in being refracted from one mirror to another, something like that. And Leibniz, and in other places, Leibniz will point out, okay, so that it looks like nature operates maximally efficiently that way, right? or he'll say, look, the only way we can do science is we presuppose this principle of simplicity, that we assume we don't multiply causes needlessly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what he's saying there, because remember, his notion of best is efficient,
Mm-hmm.
okay? And he's saying, well, look, the geometric laws themselves that we have seem to operate by this higher law of maximal good for least principle of investment.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's the point he's making here. Is like he thinks it does, even though you don't cite, oh, and therefore God moves the light along the most efficient path. The very fact that you look for the most efficient path for the light to move according to this law is evidence that you're in a universe, right, that is operating by these moral and metaphysical principles.
Right. You know, that's interesting to emphasize how many important scientific discoveries have come out of that type of presumption, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in chemistry, or even just not the presumption of efficiency, but also the presumption of elegance, symmetry, right? I mean,
exactly what Leibniz says.
Think particle physics, right? Periodic table of elements, right? Things were posited before they were discovered because they, like, you know, people just thought, hey, it would be weird if this wasn't the case, right?
Yes.
Now, where is that coming from, right? Why should we expect the world to be that way? Well, if there's a maximally great mind behind it that is not just efficient, but maybe also a bit of an artist, let's say, that might help to explain that presumption, right? Mm-hmm.
And if you want to see this principle that you can see in Leibniz here, where it plays out in the German tradition of philosophizing, read Kant's Critique of Judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because this is a major driving piece in Kant's Critique of Judgment, is that we have to presuppose these morally, aesthetically pleasing principles like simplicity, elegance, efficiency, to get the scientific endeavor off the ground. That you have to assume a purposiveness to nature, even if you don't claim to know what the purpose is. He calls it a purposeless purposiveness, right? We don't know what nature is for, qua scientists, but it seems like we have to treat it as though it is for something to get the very project off the ground, right?
Right.
And Leibniz's, more realist interpretation of that is to say, well, this just shows that these moral and metaphysical principles are what's really running the show in reality, right?
Right.
And he's connected these to his first cause argument.
Right.
I think it's just an elegant and brilliant thing that he's doing here.
No, I think he's obviously correct. I mean, I shared a tweet with you not too long ago from a pretty well-known physicist. We won't throw him under the bus until he's here to defend himself, but dude's a materialist, and like the tweet was kind of ironic because he's like, it suddenly struck me or something like that like, why do the laws of nature hold, or what are they, right? And he's like, if they're just if they just describe the way things go, and that was his position, he's like, well, why should they keep going that way, right? Like, what explains that? And like, he just left that as a question mark. And it's like, I think Leibniz might have something there, right? Right? And this is not insignificant. Like, if there's a message to the people, don't mistake what is common for what is insignificant. Much of what is common is extremely significant. Here's a significant fact: we continue in existence. That's common. We take that for granted. I mean, I'm banking my dinner on it, right? That is
continue to exist elegantly.
Right. That is not insignificant. What explains not just the existence of anything, but continued existence, right? What explains that? Or why do these laws just continually hold? And not just like, you can kind of like think like maybe they won't tomorrow, but at the end of the day, we all bank on it, right? We all bank on it. The scientist certainly banks on it. What explains that? Well, theism explains it really well. Continued existence is guaranteed if you have a necessary reality, right? It's 100% predicted by that. And Leibniz's framework here gives us a really great, elegant explanation of really what he's kind of hinting at here is the very ancient argument of, the argument from eternal truths, right? He's kind of see there's some Augustinian flavor there, right?
Yeah. I mean, he's mentioned it like in the text here.
Yeah. So just, don't mistake. I mean, that's so much kind of what philosophy is, right? It's critically reflective. It's turning back on things that we often take for granted,
right,
and realize how significant they are, even though they're very common, right? And trying to analyze it, right?
Yeah.
But it's funny. Brendan knows what one I'm talking about.
I wouldn't know what you're talking about, Brendan. I'm sure I don't know what you mean.
The tweet was making the rounds, so I'm sure people have seen it. Yeah. It was. I mean, it's just kind of like deeply ironic, right?
Yeah. And also this is a foreshadow because now we're gonna end up doing the monadology now. We have to, right?
Okay. Gotta do it. Gotta do it.
And primary truths and monadology eventually, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this gets into stuff that I worked on when I was down the Leibnizian rabbit hole. Is this becomes and this fits other stuff that we've talked about recently on the show. Leibniz is his sort of panpsychism is a panpsychism not just driven by qualia, but it's driven by the need for a determinate teleological structure, right, in reality to account for laws.
Yeah.
Like he thinks the laws can only make sense in as much as there's teleology. And
well, I mean,
built in. He thinks it's conscious, so it has to be built into the conscious has to be built into the very atoms of things.
Right,
a teleological consciousness, not qualitative.
Because laws have, when you think about laws, they have a thought-like structure, right?
Yes.
That's a profound thing to realize, that laws have a thought-like structure. Just something to meditate on that seems to connect well with Leibniz here, right?
Definitely.
All right, so continuing on. Yeah, let's dive back in here. Okay. Continuing on, Leibniz writes, and so the ultimate reason for the reality of both essences and existences lies in one thing, which must of necessity be greater than the world, higher than the world, and must have existed before the world did, since through it, not only existing things which make up the world, but also possibles have their reality. Moreover, it can be sought in but one source because of the interconnection among all these things. That's an important point. We'll come back to that.
Yeah.
Furthermore, it is obvious that from this source, things are continually flowing forth or being produced and were produced, since it is not clear why one state of the world any more than another, yesterday's any more than today's, should flow from it. It is also obvious how God acts not only physically, but freely, how in him there is not only the efficient cause of things, but their final cause, and how in him we have not only the reason for the greatness or power and the mechanism of the universe as now constituted, but also the reason for the goodness or wisdom in constituting it. Jim, I have the tingles.
Yes, right. Woo. Here we go. Woo.
Very special seeming right there. That was a great paragraph.
Yeah, that's a great paragraph, right?
So, I mean, look, one in the many, right?
how much fun this guy is. I can see why I got hooked on him. Yeah.
Yeah, one in the many right there, right? Look, we can't explain, diversity by further diversity, right? He's kind of like hearkening back. It's so cool to see how he is blending a lot of really traditional insights subtly into his argument, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, he's obviously a deeply learned man, right? Yeah. So it must be sought in one source because the interconnectedness of all things, right? All things they're different in a sense, right? To say that the horse is also to say that the horse is not the dog, yet they also all have something in common, right? They all share in existence, actuality, right?
To run an argument that you can see deployed brilliantly from Plato through Leibniz through Hegel is to say that a horse is not a dog presupposes that you understand what an animal is in distinction from both of them. So there's got to be, in order to differentiate, there's got to be a deeper connection or a broader connection, right?
Yeah, unity before diversity, right? 100%.
Unity before diversity. He's running, as you mentioned, he's running the one in the many here, and we're getting a particularly modern physics expression of the one in the many. Like, so Leibniz, why do you think there's only one morally perfect creator? Now he doesn't run like what a Thomist would do, and there's nothing wrong with this kind of argument. Say, well, if there were two of them, you'd have to have a principle of difference between them. So you've got a matter-form distinction within them, and now they're not simple, and you lose the five ways. Okay, fabulous argument, but that's not the way Leibniz proceeds here. He said, well, it seems like we can, because everything is interconnected, right? Ultimately, he thinks there's an overall completed physics, a single law. There's going to be a theory of everything, he thinks. And since there's going to be a theory of everything, a single principle running the whole physical show, it would seem you only need one, right? It only makes sense that there would be one creator for that whole thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Well, there's one other, so obviously he's not a deist, right? Because we can see why he thinks that God's action must be continuous, right?
Yep.
So we see that here. Cool. Should we just keep going then?
Let's keep going.
All right.
Well, and I would say then, not just failing to be a deist, God is now somehow providential too, right? Because this, he did all this with like maximum efficiency in mind. He had all the outcomes. It's all been arranged, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. He didn't just, kick his feet up and go tend to more seemly recreations, right?
Exactly.
And lest anyone think that I am here confusing moral perfection or goodness with metaphysical perfection or greatness, and grant the latter while denying the former, one must realize that it follows from what I have said that not only is the world physically, or if you prefer metaphysically, most perfect, that is, that the series of things which has been brought forth is the one in which there is, in actuality, the greatest amount of reality, but it also follows that the world is morally most perfect, since moral perfection is in reality physical perfection with respect to minds. From this, it follows that the world is not only the most admirable machine, but insofar as is made up of minds, it is also the best republic, the republic through which minds derive the greatest possible happiness and joy, in which their physical perfection consists. All right, some big statements there, Jim. Help us unpack
So,
this.
and you can see where we're going to the monadology here, right?
Yep.
Okay, so let's first of all, what does perfection mean for Leibniz, right? You get maximal being, right? You get maximal being, okay. And what does he mean by maximal being? Not the quantitatively most. It's the best and most efficiently achieved ratio of being to non-being, right? Of goodness to evil, right? And he runs it both ways. The world is the best in terms of it. And now, why does he think it? Because otherwise it wouldn't be. Otherwise, we wouldn't satisfy the PSR, because we have to say this is the result of a perfect creator, right? By the PSR. And a perfect creator would only make a world that gave us, in Leibniz's view, the most like efficient means we can to the greatest possible set of phenomena that we can have. And he means literally, it's going to be the most beautiful world we can get.
Right.
He's going to go aesthetic here, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Now, can we? Yeah. No. Let's just address the Voltaire cartoon objection, where somebody's obviously, going to be like, well, hold on, right? I mean, have you turned?
He's gonna hit that in the next paragraph.
Okay, we'll wait. We'll wait that. Yeah. All right. Should we just continue on to the next paragraph?
There's one more thing I want to make here. So,
yeah. Do it.
Yeah. But it follows that this world is morally most perfect, since moral perfection is in reality physical perfection with respect to minds. Okay. From this, it follows that the world is not only the most admirable machine, okay, aesthetic again there, but insofar as it is made up of minds, it is also the best republic, a republic through which minds derive the greatest possible happiness and joy, in which their physical perfection consists. Okay. So what he means, not physically, doesn't necessarily mean like bodily, okay? Like he means according to the laws, right? So he's saying that, like, okay, so what would the best kinds of beings be? They would be minds, okay? So what he's saying then here is that the world then is set up for the perfection of minds, right? It's set up, right, for ultimate joy and happiness for minds.
Okay? For minded beings, right?
For minded beings, yeah. Now, in some sense, as we're in other papers we'll read by Leibniz, all beings are minded, right, down to everything. Okay, but I think here he means in this more explicit sense, right, that he's talking about rational creatures, right?
Yeah.
Why? Because it's in these theses are connected, because the world is an admirable machine. It is knowable in and of itself, right, and therefore minds can be satisfied in it as knowers.
Yeah, right.
Big hat tip to Aristotle there. Yeah.
Yep. All right, continuing on then. But you asked, don't we experience quite the opposite in the world? For the worst often happens to the best, and not only innocent beasts, but also humans are injured and killed, even tortured. In the end, the world appears to be a certain confused chaos rather than a thing ordered by some supreme wisdom, especially if one takes note of the conduct of the human race. I confess that it appears this way at first glance, but a deeper look at things forces us to quite the contrary view. From those very considerations which I brought forward, it is obvious a priori that everything, even minds, is of the highest perfection there can be. So you mind if we pause there, Jim?
No, that's important for understanding the dialectic here.
I think this is right. This is a point. I mean, look, I used to be a naturalist fellow myself, and
we've all had that weekend.
Yeah, we all had that. We were all teenagers once to be supremely uncharitable, right? But I always love the harp on this, and maybe it's overdone, but separating what is clear from what is unclear, right? Yeah. Now, according to Leibniz, right, it might not be clear why, God allows certain bad things to happen. It might not be clear why the human race conducts themselves like such buffoons so often, right? However, according to Leibniz, it is known a priori.
Boom. Yeah, that's it.
Right? It is known a priori. That means like that's as clear as it.
Didn't you understand, son?
Son, right? So like,
yeah.
I don't care about your bitching and moaning, right? Like
exactly.
he's like laying down the gavel here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like this is not a pastoral response. Let me get me clear. Like I take the problem of evil very seriously, very serious. We all suffer tremendously. Leibniz is just being, he's just being a technician, right?
Yeah.
He's like, look, you use reason here, guys. You're like, this is emotional stuff, but we're doing philosophy, right?
Yeah.
We know a priori, right, that this is the case. Yeah. So I wanted to harp that.
Leibniz was probably a borderline, like, like Asperger's engineer guy, right? I mean, like, like he was probably not the most empathetic dude, right?
Right.
It was said he was not a very pleasant guy to be around. not that Asperger's people aren't perfectly pleasant, but it sounds like Leibniz himself was
right. But you can tell like
be less than tactful.
Like right? you can even like kind of feel it in a text. Like he's not that patient, right?
He's not a patient man.
He's not that patient. But this is like look, I think a pastoral address to the problem of evil is hugely important. I've recommended Stump's book a million times. I think Stump does a beautiful job of addressing the problem of evil, both philosophically and from a pastoral and scriptural perspective, right? So that I always point to Stump. But Leibniz's point is something that I came to in my own seeking. Was like, okay, what is actually clear to me versus what is unclear? The problem of evil has many mysterious elements. But does it really convince me that there's no God? No, like even when I was a naturalist, that wasn't the primary motivation for me being it really wasn't, right? But however, now it does seem clear to me, right, that we have demonstrations for God's existence and God's perfection, in which case it just has to be the case that God knows what he's doing and that he has reasons for things that are God-sized that I should expect not to see because I'm not God-sized, right?
Exactly.
And that to me seems like the highly reasonable perspective to take, right? It's hard.
Exactly.
I get it, but that's got to be right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And keep in mind the context, Jerry. So this guy's a rationalist. He thinks there are a priori synthetic demonstrations. Okay. Mm-hmm. He thinks that there are actual states of affairs that can be demonstrated, independently of anything empirical, and they have the greater epistemic weight than anything possibly that you could get through your senses.
Right, and they don't get just a little epistemic privileging. Like they steal the show. They steal the show, right?
Okay. And we can dispute whether there are a priori demonstrations like that. Okay, mm-hmm. But what he's doing in this paragraph, he's saying, look, I just took you through a chain of reasoning. And if you're going to say the empirical facts of the way things stand with the distribution of suffering in the world somehow undermine my argument, then I would like to see which of my premises are false, or which of my inferences are invalid, right? Because this guy, as we've talked about with this text, he proceeds chunk. He's just machining through the logic, and if you're going to deny something, it can't just be because, well, this really seems bad. Right. He's going to demand that there be some reason that you have to provide an objection to the argument.
What a cold technician, but I kind of love it, man. It's kind of like sickly beautiful, right?
Now it could be like, I can imagine, a position someone says, look, I can't tell you what's wrong with that argument, mm-hmm. but I know there's something wrong because I know this is not a world created by God or something like that. Okay. Mm-hmm. But now we've entered a different realm now, right? We've entered a different realm. Okay. Right.
Yeah, and Leibniz's position seems to set up for a modest skeptical theism, right? Yeah. Where a Leibniz would say, well, look, you're not God. You don't see the whole picture. Yep. You don't know the whole world like God knows the whole world. You know this little chunk, right? But this little chunk is not it, right? So we haven't seen, the picture in all of its efficiency, Leibniz would say, right? And
that's exactly the argument he's going to make in the next paragraph.
Right, so let's continue on. Yeah, awesome. Yeah. All right. Good. Yeah, I love
Thanks for doing the reading, by the way.
Yeah. The get off of my yard Leibniz here.
Yeah.
And indeed, it is unjust to make a judgment unless one has examined the entire law, as lawyers say. We know but a small part of the eternity which extends without measure. Yeah, exactly, right? As we were just saying. For how short is the memory of 7,000 years which history gives us? But yet, from such meager experience, we rashly make judgments about the immense and eternal, like people born and raised in prison, or if you prefer, in the subterranean salt mines of the some Martians? Is that some
Yeah.
Martians? Yeah. Just people who think that there is no light in the world but the dim light of their torches, light scarcely sufficient to guide their steps. Look at a very beautiful picture and cover it up except for some small part. What will it look like but some confused combination of colors without delight, without art? Indeed, the more closely we examine it, the more it will look that way. But as soon as the covering is removed and you see the whole surface from an appropriate place, you will understand that what looked like accidental splotches on the canvas were made with consummate skill by the creator of the work. What the eyes discover in the painting, the ears discover in music. Indeed, the most distinguished matters of composition quite often mix dissonances with consonances in order to arouse the listener and pierce him, as it were, so that, anxious about what is to happen, the listener might feel all the more pleasure when order is soon restored. Just as we delight in small dangers or in the experience of misfortune for the feeling, or for the very feeling or manifestation they provide of our power or happiness, or just as we delight in the spectacle of rope walkers or sword dancing for their very ability to incite fear, or just as we ourselves laughingly half toss children as if we are about to throw them off. It was also for this reason that when Christian, king of Denmark, was still an infant, wrapped in swaddling clothes, an ape carried him to the edge of the roof, and then, while all were in distress, the ape, almost as if he were laughing, put him safely back into the cradle.
That's going to be our first T-shirt, man.
That's amazing.
Ape dangling a little king over there.
Imagine. All right, we're gonna finish through here. We're at the end. Yeah. On that same principle, it is insipid to always eat sweet things. Sharp, acidic, and even bitter taste should be mixed in to stimulate the palate. He who hasn't tasted bitter things hasn't earned sweet things, nor indeed will appreciate them. Pleasure does not derive from uniformity. For uniformity brings forth disgust and makes us... Sorry, I'm losing a sentence there, Jim.
And makes us dull, not happy. This very principle is a law of delight.
Okay, let us stop there. So, I mean, look, this is, again, we only see one small part of the picture thing is, in fact, I mean, that is still something that has been used by many people who are skeptical theists, right?
Yeah.
That analogy is still used and pushed. And it has always struck me as quite plausible.
Yeah.
Right?
And, and he's doing something even a little stronger than that because, this is something people miss with Leibniz. It's like so much this is being driven by the aesthetics of nature, right? Mm-hmm. And he's saying like he doesn't think you can have unmixed beauty, right? Like for nature to come on, like for the palate to be pleased, you have to have bitter and sweet. They're internally connected for Leibniz, right? Mm-hmm. That there has to be a drama in order for the painting to be interesting, for the play to be interesting, right? Right. And so if there's no drama, then this would not be perfection. Right? You could get more good, right? If you didn't do it this way. In fact, right. I think you said you couldn't have any real good without it. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I would ask people to kind of search their own, intuitions on this, because I don't think intuitions are invalid by any means, and ask like, hey, given that God is perfect, does it seem right, that there might be a world where discovery can happen and danger and relationships formed and risks taken and natural regularities to provide an arena, even if people can mix with these regularities in ways that can cause, considerable harm and pain, right? And that all this could be providentially ordered to a quite spectacular form of flourishing and outcome in the end, right? Yeah. And there's inevitably going to be evils, perhaps even great evils mixed in with that. But does that seem like something you could reasonably expect on theism? Leibniz says, yeah, yes. Right? Not only do I expect it, I demand it, right?
It's a entailment. It's
right.
From So one of the first papers I published, and I'm almost afraid to mention it because I was like a youngster, right? But who knows, was on this, and I was making an argument why Leibniz would not have been troubled by evolution, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you had this like really nasty, bloody process that like brought about, the contemporary species, I think Leibniz would say, well, yeah, you couldn't have this overall beautiful picture if there were not, a grave drama as part of it, right? So I think so I've always thought that aesthetic element to Leibniz is one of the things underappreciated in what he's up to.
Yeah, I mean, aesthetic elements in general, I think, are sometimes underappreciated, especially among contemporary analytic philosophers, right? Yeah, very good.
And I think this is something we lose, like when we make jokes about Leibniz being this like soulless rationalist, but you see it even in this essay. He is moved with wonder by the beauty and elegance of creation.
Right.
He saw that light refract in exactly the most like aesthetically pleasing way, and he said, "Holy crap!"
He got a special seeming.
Woo, yeah, like it tingled, right? Yeah.
It was, yeah. That's I think Leibnizians must be they flock together, I think, because I remember Proust was giving a talk one time, and I think he said that I guess he doesn't find much beauty in music, but he finds a ton of beauty in mathematics, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But apparently Leibniz makes points about music, so I guess
he does. He does.
Yeah. Something of a connoisseur there as well. Yeah, but you're right. These aesthetics, he's not just some pure logic machine. He clearly is a man that is mesmerized by the beauty of the world, even if rightfully so, that beauty is found right in the physical structure and the laws of the world, right? That those are beautiful. And how often you see that among scientists, like, especially physicists, the beauty, especially of the mathematics, often so strikes them, right?
This is similar, phenomenon about Spinoza too. Spinoza was, just as one of his contemporaries said, was a man drunk on God, that he was just fascinated by the beauty of nature, to the point that he felt he had to collapse divinity and nature into one thing. Yeah.
Right. I'll tell you what, if anybody isn't, big on math, and I was fortunate to have a considerable amount of math in my education, just try and understand and work through a couple of the propositions in Euclid's Elements.
Yeah.
I think you will be struck by an aesthetic aspect to it. Right.
And I'll recommend to the citizens here, there's a good little book you could find pretty easily, probably used on Amazon or something, called Calculus, a Liberal Art. And it takes you through the history of mathematics, starting with the ancient Greeks and up through Newton. Okay. Explaining to you mathematics, not as a principle of engineering, but as a principle of, theoretical wisdom and aesthetics. It's a really, really wonderful experience to work through that book. Yeah.
Name it one more time.
Calculus, a Liberal Art.
Okay,
yeah. And I mean, I'm not a math guy, and I had great joy working through that book one summer.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. Should we try and finish this off, Jim?
You want to? Let's do it.
Let's do it, man. I mean, we're rocking and rolling here. Gentle listeners, we'll try and take some questions at the end. So if you got anything for us, now would be the time to start submitting.
Right.
And here we go. We really got like just a few more paragraphs. So yeah, might as well do it. All right. But what we said about the part, which can be disordered without detracting from the harmony of the whole, should not be taken to mean that there is no reason for the part, or that it would be, as it were, sufficient for the world as a whole to be perfect of its kind, even if the human race were miserable and no attention paid to justice in the universe, or no provision made for us, as certain persons of poor judgment believe about the totality of things. Certain persons of poor judgment. I love the underhanded insults, right?
And Garber here cites Spinoza.
It's like I was laughing today, man, because like, academics, right, especially professors, like they're as lowbrow as anybody. They just learn how to disguise it with the language, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like professional philosophers insult each other all the time. I was revisiting Flanagan today, and like he's taken Mackey to task, right? And like instead of calling Mackey dumb, he just says things like, what would ever make somebody think something like this, right?
Yeah.
just like we know how you feel about that.
Whatever else he might mean.
Yeah, right. There's just ways like, or if some philosopher says that seems counterintuitive, they really mean that this seems like some real dumb. Sounds real dumb.
Yeah, it's really stupid.
All right, sorry. Continuing. For one must realize that just as in the best constituted republic, care is taken that each individual gets what is good for him as much as possible. Similarly, the universe would be insufficiently perfect unless it took individuals into account as much as could be done consistently with preserving the harmony of the universe. That's a really important line.
Yeah.
It is impossible in this matter to find a better standard than the very law of justice, which dictates that everyone should take part in the perfection of the universe and in his own happiness in proportion to his own virtue, and to the extent that his will has thus contributed to the common good. This exonerates what we call the charity and love of God, in which the entire force and power of the Christian religion alone consists, in the judgment of wise theologians. Nor should the fact that minds get such deference in the universe appear astonishing, since they are produced in the exact image of the supreme creator and relate to him not only as machines to their builder, as other things do, but also to citizens, as citizens to their prince. Likewise, they are to persist as long as the universe itself does, and they express the whole in a certain way and concentrate it in themselves, so that it might be said that they are parts that are wholes. Yes,
Yep.
That's a great line, right?
Yeah, it is.
Mm-hmm.
And, and basically, what we're saying here is if the just are not rewarded and the wicked are not punished, then this would not be a perfect world. Therefore, by good rationalist reasoning, the just must be punished, must be rewarded, and the wicked must be punished, right? To the degree to which that this can all be squared away with the perfection of the world. Right?
And this is cool because Leibniz, I think, would be willing to say, probably, in fact, I think he would say this, right? If he doesn't already say it explicitly, he's kind of saying explicitly here. He does say it explicitly, right? That theism just entails an afterlife, right? So he doesn't think he wouldn't think that an afterlife is some like component theory to theism, right? He's thinking no, theism entails and demands an afterlife because to satisfy the PSR, we have to satisfy justice.
Exactly.
As well, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because otherwise, you'd have something arbitrary going on. Nothing arbitrary can happen. Bing, afterlife. Yep.
Right. And from that, you would also lead to immortality of the human person as well, right? Or at least as long as the universe exists, as he says, right? Mm-hmm. Sweet. All right, let's keep going. In addition to the beauties and perfections of the totality of the divine works, we must also recognize a certain constant and unbounded progress in the whole universe, so that it always proceeds to greater development, just as a large portion of our world is now cultivated and will become more and more so. And while certain things regress to their original wild state and others are destroyed and buried, we must, however, understand this is in the same way that we interpreted affliction a bit earlier. Indeed, this very destruction and burying leads us to the attainment of something better, so that we make a profit from the very loss in a sense. And there is a ready answer to the objection that if did I miss, Jim? Did I miss up, or am I?
Oh wait, yeah. We missed a paragraph there.
Where is I'm missing a paragraph?
No, it was you started in the last paragraph on 154.
Yep.
And we were at the second last one.
So what's it start with now? Is it
we must also hold?
We must also hold.
Go back to.
We must also hold. Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry. Thank you. Yep. Apologies, gentle listener. I got excited. We must also hold that afflictions, especially those the good have, only lead to their greater good. This is true not only in theology, but in nature as well, since a seed flung to the ground must suffer before it bears fruit. And all in all, one can say that afflictions that are bad in the short run are good in their effect, since they constitute a short path to greater perfection. It is just as in physics, where liquids that ferment slowly also improve more slowly, but those in which there is more violent disturbance improve more quickly because they eliminate impure parts with greater force. And this is what you might call stepping back in order to leap forward with greater force. These considerations must be held to be not only pleasing and consoling, but most true. I think that in the universe, nothing is truer than happiness, nor is anything happier or sweeter than truth.
That's a nice line. Yeah. So really, and just in all you read there, right? And think him in order. He's making a case for the historical progress of both the individual and the civilization, right? That on the one hand, he's saying, even though there's bumps in the road for all of us individually, we suffer, we make mistakes, we fall into sin, we come out, that ultimately there's progress being made. Like we're fermenting, like liquor's fermenting, right? You might have violence in the process, but we're getting better. How do I know that? Because once again, PSR, right? Interestingly, for like later philosophy though, is you get in the last two paragraphs, this invoking of the Enlightenment notion of progress, right? Like we are going to cultivate the earth now, right? right? Like it's going to be partly up to us to like contribute to the final expression of the perfection of the world through human, technological progress and cultivation and stuff like that, right? And there, like we might have our worries of how that's working out, right? Okay, but you can see like how he's connecting like the notion of enlightenment progress even back to the PSR now.
Right. Yeah. Spot on. All right. Let's finish this off. Then we'll give our summary
Yeah.
thoughts. In addition to the beauties and perfections of the totality of the divine works, we must also recognize a certain constant and unbounded progress in the whole universe, so that it always proceeds to greater development, just as a large portion of our world is now cultivated and will become more and more so. And while certain things regress to their original wild state and others are destroyed and buried, we must, however, understand this in the same way that we interpreted affliction a bit earlier. Indeed, this very destruction and burying leads us to the attainment of something better, so that we make a profit from a loss in a sense. And there is a ready answer to the objection that if this were so, then the world should have become paradise long ago. Many substances have already attained great perfection. However, because of the infinite divisibility of the continuum, there are always parts asleep in the abyss of things, yet to be roused and yet to be advanced to greater and better things, advanced, in a word, to greater cultivation. Thus, progress never comes to an end.
Yeah.
The end.
And so that line's great at the end there is that's Leibniz applying the calculus to social theory, right? Because like what does the calculus do? It deals with, in a sense, completed infinite. Like infinite divisibilities that you would have to transact to reach a limit, right? And so what he's saying is like the progress both of the human individual and the universe itself is just it's a arc, right? It's a slope up, right? And there's no bound to how great it can get, right? But yet there's clearly a limit it's moving towards, right? And you can see how out of this you're going to get, well, maybe God made infinitely many worlds, right? Because there's no bound, right? There's no bound, right? So in I just love at the end how he connects it back to like limit and calculus, right?
Yeah. So cool. Yeah, I was just gonna say, wow, what a series. We did it in 3 parts. That's awesome. So let's just get some summary thoughts here, Jim. What do you think? What do you want to leave people with? Or
I think for me the takeaway in this essay, because you don't get a lot of like what people think of as the classic Leibnizian doctrines. They're hinted at here. Like the notion of the monad, the internal connection among things, the complete concepts of things, the idealist stuff. It's all you could start pulling those strands out of this text, right? But what I think is great about this text and why I use it in the classroom, right, is I think it was 2 years ago I used it actually, is that they like here Leibniz hangs it all on this distinction between metaphysical and moral necessity. Okay. And you see the moral considerations driving his cosmological argument. And I think that's something that was absolutely central to what Leibniz is up to. And it's gone underemphasized by most readers of Leibniz today.
Yeah. And that connects both back to Plato, but also forward to thinkers like John Leslie as well.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
You can see Leibniz in a broadly Platonic tradition here.
Yeah, right. Yeah, big tent Platonism, right?
Big tent Platonism.
Well, we're gonna fit him in. All right, let's take a few comments and questions. Brendan says, "Why wouldn't you want to have as strong a PSR as Leibniz?" Well, we gave one reason. Some people might think, either rightly or wrongly, that it might lead to a sort of modal fatalism. That's one reason that people have tended to reject the stronger. That's probably the predominant reason.
Predominant one.
Yeah.
People will also say like maybe we're just multiplying explanations needlessly. Like do you really need an explanation for what isn't if you have an explanation for what is? Like, you know what I mean? And that's why Leibniz's notion in this text of like how all possibles tend toward being, right? It's a question: is that true?
Right. And do you need contrastive explanations? That's a large debate as well. Leibniz would say yes, actually. Leibniz would probably say, yes, you need contrastive explanations. He would say the reason God chose X rather than Y, that's a contrastive explanation, is because X had better efficiency, right? Or something like that, right? It was maximally efficient, right? But a lot of people would deny that these days, that you don't need contrastive explanations. Or they would deny that there are contrastive facts, for example. And if there's no contrastive facts, then they're not going to be covered by the PSR that person's using. I'm thinking of somebody like Kenny Pierce there, who is kind of a Leibnizian. That would be his position. Yeah. So there's a lot. I mean, it's a very technical, complicated thing when you get into the PSR, but those are just some of the reasons why people might weaken.
But also, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think you need that really strong version to run the moral version of the cosmological argument that we're seeing here.
Yeah, and nor have we said, we leave this for the readers to consider, that the strong version can't or doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully we hope you guys think about this with a somewhat, but not entirely unprejudiced mind. I mean, Jim and I talked about our tingles throughout, but
Well, and a lot of times though, when I'll get really, worked up and excited about a philosophical text, it's not necessarily because I've become convinced. It's because I'm seeing this as a virtuoso performance, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, I get tingles over people I disagree with all the time, just because it's like, dang, that's a great point, or that was so well said. Right.
It's such a great execution of philosophical technique and things like that. And that's, if you want to see, like, I'm not a rationalist, okay, but if you want to see rationalism well done, read the Ultimate Origination of Things, like that.
Right.
There it is. Like, that's a masterpiece of that philosophical genre.
Right. And it is important not to, say condemn Leibniz for like everything that happened in the rationalist tradition that you disagree with. You know what I mean? Right. Like sometimes that happens, like, because Leibniz is so associated with rationalism, and rationalism obviously took some twists and turns. That itself is no reason to dismiss Leibniz, or even think that Leibniz was committed to all that happened in the name of rationalism, any more than you should think that Thomas Aquinas was committed to all that happened in the wake of Thomism, right?
Yeah, exactly. And like we could pull out Hume's essay, and I could show you some tingling moments in there too, right? That I don't agree with, but I can just see that, wow, that is just a brilliant piece of work.
Yeah. The Unnoticeable says this is similar to what Kepler and Copernicus thought, simplicity of nature. I think this that harkens back when we were talking about efficiency and elegance. Yeah, right. Yeah, many scientists have been motivated by such assumptions, right? But it's worth asking, why do we have those assumptions, and why do they tend to be helpful, right? That's the other amazing thing about that, right? All right, we'll take one more. Brendan says, would Grant's view on free will conflict with Leibniz's PSR? I assume the good W. Matthews Grant. I don't even know what Dr. Grant's view is on the actual PSR, Jim. Do you know?
Yeah, we'll have to bring Matthews back and ask him that.
Yeah. My guess, and don't take my word on this, because I can't speak for Dr. Grant, would be that he would probably endorse the PSR and say, yes, they're compatible. And I say that because I know Proust does. Proust is a libertarian and a Leibnizian, right? So he thinks they're compatible. And I think Grant and Proust are they're not exactly the same on a lot of issues, but they're pretty close on, I think, the issues between explanation and freedom. So,
and I actually think Leibniz was a Leibnizian and a libertarian too.
Yeah.
I think that's probably taken as a weird view, but I actually have a very big unpublished paper, right? Like, I think it was actually twice rejected paper on this.
That means it was good.
It was good. Yeah, it was threatening someone. Right?
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, sweet, gentle listeners, thank you for tuning in for this series. We got Leibniz done in 3 parts here, so really appreciate you tuning in. I hope you find these series helpful. I mean, this is really cool because we got to engage with the text, but I think we kind of got to relate it to where the contemporary conversation on a lot of this stuff is at, and see the legacy that our friend Wilhelm has left here, and it's a rich one, and it's thriving. It's still going now. So Jim, any final thoughts before we close it out?
No, it's been fun. I think we'll do more of these shorter texts by Leibniz. And I think really good teaching is not just line by line commentary, though we did do some line by line commentary. It's taking, because like the student has their whole life to read that text. Okay. So we're going to use the text to occasion a broader entry point into this whole realm of associated ideas. Right. And I think that's kind of how we do things on the show here. And I think we did it well with this. So.
Yes.
If I may. Right.
Oh, you may. Now, let me just say one more time, gentle listeners, if you like what we're doing here, if you think that this work is worthy of sharing, then please share it. Please like it. Please subscribe. Please comment. We do, really appreciate your support in any way that you can give it. So please consider, I don't know, doing one of those things. And we do enjoy hearing from you too.
Exactly.
So, all right, guys, take care.
Take care.
And goodbye.